Hello everyone, this is Albus64. Real quick, I just want to say welcome to my first video on this YouTube channel here. So before I get started, I'm assuming you're clicking on this video today is because you're not a big Windows fan. And you know what, that's okay. I'm not either. Windows has been on a pretty steady decline the past few years, from just stuff like to forcing updates and upgrades that nobody wants to use but forces anyway, to like spyware and AI functions that make like the Windows OS itself pretty much a privacy nightmare. You know what? I get it. You don't like it? I don't like it. In fact, I used to be a pretty big Windows guy myself, but in recent years, because of the said direction, I have been looking into different avenues, and some of them worked, some of them didn't, due to like needs and economic reasons, and which unfortunately left me feeling pretty stuck. It wasn't until I saw a video that was recently posted by PewDiePie where he recommended Linux that gave me a way out. Originally I wouldn't consider Linux because I thought at first it would be like really hard to install or just hard to manage, but what I have learned recently is that not only are there many different distros that are easy to install, but there's quite a few of them that are beginner friendly, come in different flavors, and are actually quite easy to manage. Here are some things I learned during my time with Linux, and that will hopefully help with whether or not Linux is right for you. So, one of the first few things I learned about Linux is that you will also discover is the amount of flavors that come with Linux. And by flavor, I mean distro. Linux has about 270 of these guys. Hey guys, so quick interruption before I continue on with the video. So when I was going over the amount of Linux distros that there were in the video, I actually listed the the distro watch page hit ranking. That was my only source for how many, that's how much I source for how many Linux distributions on there. But according to two sources that I found, which is the Linux OPSys and the Linux Wikipedia, there's actually thousands of these guys, which I have completely failed to mention. I only did like some surface level research when I was in the middle of making the video, or like recording, and just what I was trying to put into the video. But either way, I just wanted to make that clear real quick. Thank you for, I don't know. Okay, I'm going to stop the interruption. Back to the video, which you'll see on this list here. There might be more that's not being shown, but you get the idea. It can be quite intimidating to start out if you don't know where to look. Ideally, when you're starting out with Linux, you want to find a distro that's beginner friendly and something that will work with your hardware, mainly because of compatibility. And possible compatibility issues that could arise if you get the wrong one. Also, before you even ask, no, Arch is not the first you should be using. Mainly because, unlike the other Linux distros, which do involve terminal work, Arch is super terminal heavy when it comes to setup and just installation, just all that stuff. You'll want to know your way around the terminal before you even touch Arch. Would it be worth it? Yes. Is it good to go into it as a beginner? No. You'll want to explore beginner ones before you go into Arch. And then, also going into Linux distros, something you want to take note about Linux distros before going in is you do not want to treat them like they are Windows. There are enough differences between them that you do not want to go in expecting it to be like Windows. Although there are some distros that mimic Windows to a fault, Linux Mint, for example, which is really good, which I'll go into in a little bit. You'll still want to treat it like it's not Windows. You'll want to preferably go into you want to have an open mind going into Linux. When you approach it with an open mind, you'll have an easier time learning. And then, when picking a Linux distro, as I said, you want to go with something that's stable around, easy to set up, and is beginner friendly. One of these I've already mentioned, which is Linux Mint. There's also Ubuntu, there's Fedora, Pop! OS, which is my current distro, and there's quite a few others that I didn't list. The most beginner-friendly of all of these is Linux Mint. Not only is it easy to set up, but it's literally one of the most stable and the most compatible out of all the Linux distros out there. If you want something that supports more modern hardware, either go with like Fedora or Pop! OS or Ubuntu if you feel like being demonized by some of the Linux community. Let's see. The best thing about beginner-friendly distros is that they allow you to get comfortable with a little feature called the terminal. If you wish to venture to Linux, you're going to want to get familiar with this important feature, mainly because it's easier to install excuse me, it's easier to install certain things through the terminal, and if something does go wrong, that's the thing you're going to be using to troubleshoot stuff. You want to know something else that's really awesome about a beginner-friendly distro? Most beginner-friendly distros actually have a huge community that is backed up by this distro. These communities are full of people that use Linux and has a wonderful community. Linux Mint, as I said, is really good for this reason because Linux Mint has a huge community. It's not like huge, but it's big enough to where if you have like any like problems with the distro you're using, or like if you happen to be using a different one, you may be best like starting off with Linux Mint because it's super compatible. Unless you're like using a NVIDIA graphics card, but other than that, it's pretty stable all around and it's backed up by a pretty big community. So there's Ubuntu, there's also Fedora, Pop. Those also have communities too. So if you ever want to like learn your way around Linux, you will definitely want to take advantage of the resources that is offered to you. There's also YouTube videos. There's also there's guides on the forums too. Either way works. You can also Google it too. Before I get too much into Googling, you want to be careful if you're using like Google's like Gemini AI. I'm not saying that it can't help you, but usually it'll pull from sources that may not be compatible for your Linux distro. Although most Linux distros use like most of them use like a pretty similar like version like Debian or just something along the lines of that. Some of them may not be supportive for like what you're looking for. If you do use Gemini AI, make sure you check the sources it's linking to make sure that it's compatible with your distro. Besides that, beginner-friendly community Linux distros, YouTube videos, and all that stuff is a pretty good way to get into Linux. So, moving on to our second point, another thing to note about Linux distros is that it takes trial and error to find the one that best suits you. This is mainly because of possible compatibility issues that can arise from unsupported drivers, just maybe some compatibility issues with the display, or just hardware that just really doesn't want to play nice. Hey guys, so real quickly, I wanted to get a little bit more technical about my computer specs here. So this right here is a, sorry, there we go. This is a Asus VivoBook 15 Pro. The model number is just sitting right there. The memory on here is pretty configurable up to a certain point. One of the RAM slots is soldered on. This is an Intel Core Ultra 9 with a discrete NVIDIA GPU with a configurable expandable SSD space. So I'm about to go over this NVIDIA GPU right here. It's kind of famous for a couple reasons, which I'm about to go over. That NVIDIA card I want to mention and highlight, mainly because it's it's actually one of the most infamous ones among the Linux community, mainly because of something called proprietary drivers. Proprietary drivers are a closed source code that is not what you would call Linux friendly, although it can work depending on which like Linux distro OS supports it. But NVIDIA just does not like to play nice when it comes to stuff like that. Mainly for one, that can vary, but a common issue that I have with the Linux distros I've been testing out, including Pop, which is the system suspend feature. That feature, for some reason, it didn't matter which one I tried, I would always have constant issues with it. The system wouldn't actually suspend. It would just like, what I would say? It would like blank for a second, screen would pop back up, lines of terminal code would show up, and for some reason my network manager would just crap out on me and just never turn back on and make my OS buggy. So I've been trying to find something that is much more compatible. Around that time, I was testing like Ubuntu, Linux Mint. For some reason, Linux Mint was weirdly the most buggy out of all those, despite it being like normally a pretty well-known, like, stable OS. I don't know. From what I've researched, it might have something to do like with NVIDIA Prime or something like that. All I do know is just that NVIDIA, for some reason, just doesn't like playing nice. It wasn't until I landed on Pop OS where there was actually much more stability involved, and I've had to install gnome tweaks to keep the system from suspending whenever I close my laptop lid. And I can actually switch to integrated graphics without having boot issues, thankfully, which has allowed me to daily drive my laptop and make things just easier. Although I can't use the suspend feature, it's the one I found to be the most stable. And thankfully, there's a Linux distro for lightweight hardware. If you were to get into Linux, though, I would recommend that you would look into your computer's hardware just to make sure everything works right. If you have if you have stuff mainly from Intel and AMD, those companies are pretty well known for having like Linux-friendly hardware, including their graphics cards. I'll also list a couple PC brands that also sell Linux-friendly computers. There's Dell, Lenovo, System76, and Tuxedo Computers. I'm not going to list all of them for sake of time, but there's more out there. Those computers are, as I said, also known for having Linux-tested hardware. Most popular of these is the Lenovo ThinkPads. Their hardware works with Linux straight out of the box. Let's see, if you want something that... If you want to go with a computer brand that is more friendly when it comes to its hardware, I would recommend looking to System76 for Tuxedo Computers. Unlike the other brands, these two here, along with other Linux-focused computers, they can be a bit more expensive compared to the other computers on the market. Mainly because they actually test that hardware they're selling to be Linux-friendly, with its features. But I do want to highlight a couple pros that you will find on these brands that you will with the others. Is that the first and foremost is that they support the right to repair and the right to upgrade. Both System76 and Tuxedo Computers both support the right to upgrade and the right to repair without voiding your warranty, which means that you can get the base configuration of any of their desktops or laptops and just pretty much slap a couple upgrades of your own on there, if you wish. Second pro would be that the hardware of these... Actually, I've already listed this one, but I'll go ahead and go over it. The second pro would be that the hardware, these computers, that these companies offer is tested to be compatible with Linux and fully supported. There's nothing wrong with buying the more mainstream brands that sell Linux-friendly computers because they could be more cost-friendly compared to the other two I just listed. But because they are bigger companies, their warranties can vary and parts may be soldered on. This isn't a huge issue, however, because of the next pro. A last but not least pro is that it runs Linux. You're probably wondering, that sounds really redundant. I mean, that one's pretty obvious, but I haven't really gone into full details as to why. Linux distros are known for being super lightweight compared to Windows, as they only take the resources that they need to run. This means that you can happily set on the base configuration of your PC without having to upgrade so much because of how little resources Linux takes. In other words, you probably won't want to upgrade unless you plan on gaming, or you like to make content, or anime, or just anything that requires a heavy task load. It'll probably work fine on the base configuration that you'll get because, as I said, Linux is pretty lightweight. Especially Mint. Especially if you're getting Linux Mint. Either way, you can't really go wrong with your resources on Linux. As I said earlier, it's not really a huge deal buying from more mainstream brands. Linux makes the best of the specs that can increase the longevity of your computer. Unlike Windows, which every now and then will require hard upgrades for whichever OS they release. Just depending. Whichever route you decide to go, make sure that said route is compatible. So one last point I want to go over. There's one more thing you need to know about Linux, is that not every single program made for Windows is going to have its own Linux variant. Several exceptions will include Discord and Steam. This will unfortunately, antivirus is not an exception to this rule. There's pretty much a lack of antivirus. This is mainly because Linux is not as popular as Windows, so it's not as big of a target, so you won't have to worry about malware as much. Most Linux distros are secured by default, but it's still best to use like an ad blocker or just malware blocker that you can put on a browser. It just doesn't hurt to be safe on the internet. I won't go into too much detail about every program that's out there or the alternative, because this is pretty much strictly based on the individual needs and wants. A good alternative to like some Windows programs like Microsoft Office is LibreOffice. Not only is that program free, it does also come with pre-installed. It also comes pre-installed on most Linux distros, depending on what you want installed. If you are perfectly fine with breaking away from Windows and your work environment does not require it, you can switch to Linux pretty easily. However, if it is required, you'll probably want to stick with Windows. I mean, if you still need Windows but want to explore Linux and like program authors, you can look into either dual booting or a VirtualBox. However you want to experiment with it doesn't matter, as long as you're willing to learn and experiment with it. Either way, either VirtualBox or dual booting, either one will work. Alright, and that is it for today's video. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you got some info from this video. If you ever have any questions about certain distros or you wish to learn more about Linux, there are communities and YouTube videos dedicated to Linux that can help you troubleshoot and navigate whichever distro you choose. If you liked what you saw, make sure you give this video a like. If you wish to see more content about Linux or other stuff I'm passionate about and you just want to support the channel, how about getting a subscribe? And on that note, this is Elvis64, signing off.